Hello everyone, Inquisitor Vuln here, and in this video we are going to continue with our Cursed Founding series by going into the Lamenters Chapter. The Lamenters Chapter are one of the 7 chapters said to have been created as a result of the Cursed Founding. They are perhaps one of the most well-known Cursed Founding chapters, besides the Minotaurs and the Black Dragons, but their notoriety is due to their tragedy more than anything else. The Lamenters Chapter are known for being cursed with the most consistent bad luck of any chapter in the Imperium of Man, and in this video we are going to look into their lore and determine whether or not they were actually one of the Cursed Founding chapters. The Lamenters are known to be successors of the Blood Angels chapter. The Lamenters chapter color scheme is primarily a bright or mustard yellow, depending on the depiction that you're looking at, which is an odd color for the successor of the Blood Angels, which typically wear black, red, and gold. Yellow is a color that has been used by the Blood Angels chapter and Legion occasionally in like banners and the color of helmets, but fully yellow armor is unusual and it makes the chapter stand out. The color of their armor could be a reference to many things, like non-metallic gold or blonde. In either case, they could be references to Sanguinius's armor, which was gold, or his hair, which was yellow blonde. The Lamenters chapter heraldry is what is described in some places as a bleeding heart. The way it's presented in modern references, it seems as if the black and white checkered pattern is a part of their heraldry, but in previous renditions, it was just a feature on one of their shoulder pads, the shoulder pad opposite of the one bearing the heraldry. In modern portrayals, they are both shown on the same shoulder pad. In almost all renditions, the heart is red on a field of white, but the drop next to the heart is either black or red, depending on what image you are looking at. The heart-shaped heraldry, I think, is a reference to Sanguinius, who had multiple rubies on different parts of his armor. One of these rubies was a heart-shaped gem on his breastplate, and the heart was surrounded by golden flames. This symbolized the burning spirits of the Blood Angels as expressed through their Primarch. The droplet next to the heart in the heraldry might simply be a drop of blood, as it's a common symbol used by the Blood Angels and their successors, but it also might be a teardrop, and I'll explain why later in the video. I researched as much as I could concerning the checker pattern that is featured on the pauldrons of the Lamenters and their origin, but I couldn't find any information to note. But I do want to talk about this a little bit more later in the video. The Lamenters chapter battle cry is, "For those we cherish, we die in glory," and it fits well with their symbology of the heart as their heraldry and its connection to the themes of love and idealism. The Lamenters chapter are named after the act of lamentation, which is the passionate act of expressing grief and sorrow. Their chapter name might be a reference to the history of the Blood Angels, and I will explain that shortly. For a chapter to have been one of the Cursed Founding chapters, they had to have been created on Inquilaba. According to available information, it is stated directly that the Lamenters chapter was created by the Adeptus Mechanicus on Mars. Now, from what we know about Inquilaba, it is said that gene seed was manipulated there, but there is nothing to say that any chapters were actually made on the world. It's more than possible that modified gene seed of the chapters they considered successful were sent to Mars to be reproduced in large numbers. However, the lore for the Lamenters doesn't even say that they were a product of the Cursed Founding, but says that they were raised up during it, meaning at the same time around M36. As we know, the Dark Founding happened at the same time, so they could have been a product of it instead. The lore also says directly that it was the Adeptus Mechanicus that manipulated the gene seed of the chapter, instead of veiling who was responsible or attributing the changes to the genitors of Inquilaba. So it's fair to conclude that the chapter was created on Mars by the Adeptus Mechanicus. As I said, the Lamenters are successors of the Blood Angels, and to understand why they are so deviant, we have to understand the Blood Angels Legion for a bit. The Blood Angels chapter suffers from 2 flaws. One is the Red Thirst and the other is the Black Rage. The origin of the Red Thirst is in the 9th Legion's practices on Terra during the later Unification Wars. all Space Marines have a gene seed organ called the omophagia organ. It allows Space Marines to gather information and memories through the consumption of the flesh of an enemy. The early 9th Legion would utilize this organ frequently in the battles that they were deployed in against the mutants that thrived in the irradiated planes of Terra in order to gain information about their enemies. This combined with the Legion recruiting from those very same mutant populations, many of whom were cannibals, warped their gene seed. This repeated practice over time would shape the Legion's omophagia organ to be hyperactive and imbue the Astartes with the desire to consume flesh and drink blood. A lot of people tend to ignore that half of things. The Blood Angels definitely drank blood, but they also ate flesh. The Blood Angels are less vampires and more cannibals, but if you think about it, they're kind of the same thing. The Legion even consumed their own Astartes, carrying on the name and deeds of fallen leaders by having their successor consume a part of the previous leader and assume their name and identity. These practices became so entrenched in the culture of the 9th Legion that the Emperor actually tried to get rid of the Legion on the moons of Neptune. He deployed them there and he left them to die, but they were far too resilient, and with the ability to recruit devolved mutants into their Legion, they simply recruited the devolved mutants from Neptune into their Legion, and so when the Emperor returned, the Legion was at full strength. The Blood Angel gene seed seemed specifically tailored to transform the most devolved human mutants into fair and beautiful Astartes. The red thirst was not sourced from the Emperor's design for Sanguinius. It was a mutation of the gene seed due to the early practices of the Legion. However, the urge or impulse to consume flesh was likely sourced from the lineage of Sanguinius's human body, like a hidden genetic recessive trait, which would raise some questions about where the Emperor received the human child that would be transformed into the 9th Primarch, but that's another topic for another day. Just to elaborate on that point a little bit, right? So the Emperor didn't make the 9th Legion to be cannibals. This was a result of many things. First, it was a result of Sanguinius. Sanguinius's human body, Sanguinius's human genetics had this quirk of cannibalism. The Emperor maybe didn't know that that was there, but he took Sanguinius's DNA, he made a gene seed from it, then he took that gene seed and planted it into Astartes, or made people Astartes with that gene seed, deployed them into the irradiated plains of Terra to fight against the mutants there, all of whom were cannibals, right? Now, the only way that the Blood Angels were able to determine their enemy and the moves and the information that they needed to fight these mutants, they had to eat them. They had to exercise their omophagia organ, which all Space Marines have. But again, these people are also cannibals. And just like a real world reference, right? You're not supposed to eat people because it can make you go crazy. It has to do with misfolded proteins and prions, and basically when someone eats another person, they go crazy. Right now, the Legion was deployed into these irradiated war zones, and they were eating the people who also ate other people. This over time kind of made the omophagia organ hyperactive. It kind of like activated the hidden gene of Sanguinius in them, and they kept doing it to the point that the omophagia organ was warped and changed. So knowing the initial recruits of a Legion is important, because the nature and the practices of the initial recruits will imprint themselves onto the gene seed and affect the Legion moving forward far into the future, right? Now, if we look at the information for the early Blood Angels Legion, we don't have any information about the initial recruits to the Legion, but if we look at available information, the fact that their gene seed is specifically tailored to transform mutants into fair Astartes. If we look at the Blood Angels Legion being deployed into these irradiated war zones to fight human cannibals and mutants, and if we look at the fact that every single time they are deployed in this kind of war zone, they recruit from the mutant populations, I think we can come to a conclusion that the initial recruits to the Blood Angels Legion were mutants and cannibals. And this explains why the hidden genome of Sanguinius, the urge for cannibalism, was activated so instantaneously with the Legion. If the Emperor had have chosen a different population of humanity to imbue this gene seed into, perhaps the reaction or the results would not have been so extreme. But we know that the Emperor didn't anticipate this hidden quirk within Sanguinius's genetic makeup. right? Because when he saw what the Blood Angels were becoming, and they were called the Revenant Legion at that time, when he saw what the Ninth Legion were becoming at that time, he sent them to Neptune to fight against the mutants in the Neptune moons, and he left them. He wanted them to die. The problem was the Legion was already made to recruit human mutants, and so when he finally got into contact with them, when he finally made it to Neptune, the Legion was at full strength. So that was just a little bit about the origin of the Red Thirst in the Blood Angels Legion. The second flaw of the Blood Angels gene seed is the Black Rage, but it's less of a physical flaw and more of a psychic imprint. Sanguinius and his legion are psychically connected more so than any other legion. At Sanguinius's death at the hands of Horus Lupercal, his last moments would be psychically experienced by all of the Astartes of his legion in the form of an overwhelming rage. This rage would eventually become known as the Black Rage, and it would be a psychic curse that burdened the future chapters of the Blood Angels. During the Black Rage, a Blood Angel believes himself to be Sanguinius fighting against Horus, and he gives into a fury that completely displaces him from the reality around him. It also imbues the Blood Angel with Primarch-like strength and power for the time that he is under the influence of the Black Rage. Often experiencing the Black Rage means the death of the Blood Angel experiencing it, because they often lack the urge for self-preservation in their rage, and so they're often killed in their assaults. But if the Blood Angel survives, he must often be killed before he turns onto other people, even allies, because everyone around him becomes Horus. The Blood Angels utilize this flaw and create a unit called the Death Company for those Marines under the Black Rage, using them as elite close combat assault troops. Like I said in the second video of this series, the Blood Angels are one of the prime examples of a chapter that would be subjected to the genitors of Inculaba, who were trying to get rid of gene seed flaws. The reason why the Lamenters are said to have been created as part of the Cursed Founding was because their gene seed was supposedly modified to be without the Red Thirst and the Black Rage. As such, they are the only Blood Angel successors said to be immune to the curses of the Blood Angels lineage. How the Genitors of Mars were able to do this, we don't know, but you do know that we're going to speculate. If we trace the Blood Angels lineage, all successors of the Blood Angels are successors of the first founding chapter, meaning that all successors are made from the same gene seed type of the Blood Angels. This is interesting because according to available information when researching the Black Rage, during the Horus Heresy, all of the stores of Blood Angels gene seed were destroyed. It said that in order to replenish the Legion's numbers, new gene seed had to be made using genetic samples of Sanguinius's DNA. This is used to explain why Blood Angels who weren't even made during the Horus Heresy experienced the Black Rage. But in actuality, it's just because the Black Rage is a psychic affliction connected to Sanguinius's gene seed. But I do think the information about the new gene seed needing to be made reveals something else. During the second founding, the Blood Angels Legion was divided into a minimum of 7 chapters, meaning at a minimum there were 7,000 Blood Angels left after the Horus Heresy. The Blood Angels would have successors made during the third founding as well, and so on. With the gene seed tithe required from all chapters, this would mean that the Blood Angels lineage was able to survive without using the new gene seed created at the end of the Horus Heresy, using the DNA of Sanguinius. Hypothetically, of course. I say this because the available information does say that it was during the battles of Terra and Mars in the Horus Heresy that the gene seed stores were destroyed, which means that they were destroyed near the closing of the heresy, near the siege of Terra. It's more than possible that after the Horus Heresy, but before the second founding, gene seed was created to build the Blood Angels numbers again. We don't know the casualties that the Legion had at the end of the conflict, but we do know that the Legion was divided into a minimum of 7 chapters though. The reason why I'm skeptical about whether or not the Blood Angels used this supposed gene seed created to replenish their numbers at the end of the Horus Heresy is because of the nature of the chapters created during the second founding. All of those listed, all of them, the Angels in Carmine, the Angels Sanguine, the Angels Vermilion, the Blood Drinkers, the Flesh Terrors, and the Sons of Sanguinius, All of them suffer from the Blood Angel's gene seed flaws with the same intensity that the Legion always has. To me, this says that the Blood Angels that survived the heresy were not rebuilt using this mysterious new gene seed made to rebuild the Legion, because if they were, their nature would be different. Remember earlier I said that if the Emperor had chosen a different population to imbue the 9th Legion gene seed into, they perhaps wouldn't have developed the Red Thirst as strongly as they did. If there was a gene seed created after the Horus Heresy using Sanguinius's DNA, it would be separate from the gene seed recycled by the Blood Angels and their successors, and hypothetically, it would be without the flaw of the Red Thirst, at least in the intensity that it's found in the current Blood Angels. I think it's possible that this new batch of Blood Angels gene seed was likely what was used to create the Lamenters Chapter. As I said earlier, the 9th Legion's gene seed seems specifically designed by the Emperor for humans mutated far past the threshold of what could be considered human anymore. Even though the current practices of reproducing gene seed organs requires that the subjects used to do this are without any mutation, the chapters made using the Blood Angel's gene seed tithe still have the flaws. This again reinforces the idea that it was old Legion gene seed being used to create the successor chapters of the Blood Angels. The Lamenters Chapter are different. They supposedly were created with immunity from the flaws of the Blood Angels lineage. This is technically not true. The chapter does seem to be immune from the Red Thirst, but in actuality it's really just delayed. The 9th Legion's urge to consume flesh and drink blood is due to how frequently the practice was done during the Unification Wars, but the source of this impulse was in the human genetic makeup of Sanguinius. Though Sanguinius himself didn't suffer the Red Thirst, he knew it came from him. Though the Lamenters don't experience it now, just from being made by Sanguinius's DNA, it might just be taking them longer to experience due to them being created from gene seed not sourced from the Legion's older days, the old Legion gene seed. They are also not immune to the Black Rage, and the Lamenters Chapter have an active death company of their own. This is likely due to the fact that the Black Rage is a psychic flaw rather than a physical flaw, and the Mechanicus can't really deal with anything of true psychic origin such as the Black Rage. Regardless of all of this, the lack, or rather delayed experience of the Red Thirst and the possession of the Black Rage are not why the chapter is considered cursed. They are considered cursed for two reasons: their depression and their bad luck. Whereas most Blood Angel successors are known for their rage and fury in battle, the Lamenters are known for their melancholy and mental depression. Officially, it's unknown whether or not this is an effect of their gene seed or simply due to the chapter's history, but considering they are named the Lamenters and that all Marines of the chapter experience this depression, it is likely an aspect of their gene seed. It's said that the Marines of this chapter have a palpable aura of grief and bitter hatred that radiates from them. The fact that they have depression doesn't mean that they don't have the Black Rage. They struggle with it like every other successor, and as I said earlier, the Lamenters even have their own death company. Their melancholy is interesting as the Blood Angels Legion did not experience this as a collective. There are themes of sadness and mourning within the Legion along with their passionate emotions of hate, but the Legion itself wasn't known for being melancholy as a collective, even after the death of Sanguinius. But you know who did experience a powerful melancholy? Sanguinius himself. The Primarch Sanguinius became increasingly depressed as the Horus Heresy continued due to a combination of a reaction toward the heresy itself and his knowledge, his future visions that he would eventually die to Horus's hand. It can be reasonably concluded that their depression is a psychic flaw inherited from their Primarch, but if that is the case, then it wasn't sourced from any manipulations done to their gene seed. The Mechanicus doesn't deal in true psychic phenomena. This begs the question, what modifications were done to the gene seed then? Why they experience this where other successors do not is officially unknown, but I theorize it has to do with the source of the DNA used to create their gene seed. Remember earlier when I said that in order to replenish the Legion's numbers after the Horus Heresy, new gene seed was made using the DNA of Sanguinius? That DNA was sourced from Sanguinius's dead body. And if the gene seed was the same gene seed that was used to create the Lamenters chapter, then that might have something to do with why they experience such a powerful, emanating melancholy. The second flaw that they exhibit is their extreme bad luck, and this is an aspect of their history that we actually have to look into in order to verify. So, being a fleet-based chapter, the Lamenters would officially begin their military campaigns fighting in the western fringes of Imperial space, avoiding the infighting and conflict that was happening between other chapters created at the time. They were a crusading chapter. They served as heroes to isolated Imperial worlds on that side of the galaxy, fighting against Xenos there in protection of humanity. They would continue this for the next 1500 years of their history, and they replenished their numbers with recruits from various feudal worlds encountered in their travels. It was during this time that the chapter exercised their mastery of shock assault tactics and the use of flyers. Notably, the chapter's sanguinary priests, or apothecaries, were important not only for preserving the chapter's gene seed, but also serving like chaplains more so than any other Blood Angel successor. They tended to the chapter's melancholy nature. It was during this time in the western fringes that they developed an isolationist characteristic, which made it so that they didn't get resupplies very often. They didn't have access to Blood Angel weapons like the Baal Predator tank or the Land Raider or many forms of Land Raider, and they barely had any Dreadnought armor. These things would remain consistent throughout their history as a chapter. In the 39th millennium, the Lamenters were recalled by the High Lords of Terra along with many other crusading chapters to help deal with the new surge of chaos threats emerging from the Eye of Terror. Now, just a quick note about crusading chapters. Crusader chapters are characterized by their task, their objective, to push the boundaries of the Imperium in a certain direction. So that's why the High Lords had to recall them. They were sent to the west to push the boundary in that direction, and then they were recalled during the 39th millennium. Though they were legitimately an accomplished chapter with many victory honors, for some reason they were viewed with suspicion by the other commanders taking part in the campaign. This suspicion initially could have been due to the chapter's decision to head west during that period of time following the 37th millennium. So many chapters were found to be flawed during that time or fell to chaos that it seemed as if they were themselves avoiding scrutiny. This suspicion could have also been reinforced by the aura of perpetual sorrow and melancholy the Astartes of this chapter radiated in the presence of others. Pretty soon, rumors began to spread around the chapter talking of bad luck and misfortune, and this kind of got out of control. They were basically abandoned by the highly superstitious Mortifactors chapter on the hive world of Corellia during this campaign due to the rumors spreading around the Lamenters. And due to being abandoned, the chapter suffered horrendous casualties while they held off a chaos attack for over a month before the Ultramarines and the White Scars arrived. They got beat up, and the chapter deployed in full to Corellia, but only a few hundred survived this battle. Following this, the Lamenters chapter fleet was lost in the warp for around 100 years before fighting their way back into real space. Just to make a quick comment about the time that the chapter spent in the warp for those who think it's a long time, Space Marines can live for hundreds of years and Blood Angels are the longest lived of any Space Marines. Besides that, time in the warp is experienced differently. To the Lamenters lost in the warp, they probably fought their way back to real space rather quickly in what felt like a few days or so, but in real space, 100 years passed by. After emerging from the warp, the chapter rebuilt its numbers and was deployed by the High Lords of Terra to the Maelstrom Zone to aid in defense against Chaos forces there. They primarily patrolled the western expanse of the Maelstrom Zone against Chaos pirate fleets. This deployment would see the Lamenters ally with the Astral Claws chapter, and due to this alliance, the Lamenters would end up being secessionists in the Badab War. The Badab War was basically the Horus Heresy in the 40k setting, just replaced Primarchs with Chapter Master and Horus Lupercal with Lufthuron. The Lamenters joined Huron because they believed themselves to be defending the autonomy of Space Marine chapters from the increasing control of the High Lords of Terra. They would pay for this misguided belief when they were attacked by the Minotaurs chapter, who were considered part of the Loyalist side. The Minotaurs will have their own video in this series, as they are another one of the supposed curse founding chapters, but one thing to know about the Minotaurs chapter is that they fight as an entire chapter. So when they engaged the Lamenters, it was 1,000 Marines and a full chapter's worth of ships versus the Lamenters, who were spread throughout the Maelstrom Zone. The Minotaurs attacked the chapter's battle barge flagship, Mater Lacrimarum, and the Lamenters were immediately put on the defensive because the future of the chapter, its store of gene seed, were on the ship. The Minotaurs sabotaged the ship's plasma reactors so that it couldn't escape. The Lamenters had to fight from a fixed position and then held out for 17 hours as the Minotaurs' fleet attacked the Lamenters' vessels. The Lamenters took their numbers from the Minotaurs' ranks, but due to the sheer brutality and overwhelming numbers of the Minotaurs, the Lamenters were forced to surrender rather than face annihilation, and they were taken prisoner by the Minotaurs. Around 300 Lamenters were imprisoned, and they actually had to be moved to a prison space hulk because they were literally going insane on their own ship. The Lamenters' armor, weapons, and resources were taken by the Minotaurs, and the majority of their ships were salvaged from, but mostly left to drift in the coldness of space. The Lamenters would later be judged by the High Lords of Terra and 5 Space Marine chapter masters for their participation in the Badab War. They were guilty of being on the wrong side, but they were still loyal to the Imperium, so their remaining numbers were sent on a penitent crusade. During this, the chapter fought in the Second Tyrannic War, suffering further losses, but unlike before, they weren't allowed to recruit or replenish their numbers as a condition of being on a penitent crusade. At this point in time, it was uncertain whether or not they would survive their crusade. So, my question about the Lamenters is, where is this bad luck that people keep talking about? Everything that they experienced has also been experienced by almost every other chapter that has ever existed. If we're talking about the incident on Corellia and how they lost so many of their Marines in that battle, it was literally because the Mortifactors abandoned them. They were abandoned by a superstitious chapter that believed vague rumors about the Lamenters, leaving them to fight for their lives. The Lamenters refused to leave the human population of Corellia vulnerable. These two things are the reason why they lost so many Marines during that conflict, not bad luck. If we're talking about them getting lost in the warp, so many chapters got lost in the warp around this time in Imperial history that it was damn near standard. 57 chapters of Space Marines were lost in the Imperium between the 13th and 23rd foundings, and a significant portion of them were lost in the warp. That's hardly bad luck. In fact, it should be considered good luck that they were able to emerge from the warp. If we're talking about how the Lamenters were forced to submit to the Minotaurs during the Badab War, that wasn't bad luck at all. That was just inevitable. Like I said, the Minotaurs fight as a complete chapter, and they are relentless. Everybody who faces against the Minotaurs gets beat up and robbed by them. They're literally bullies. Them being judged by the High Lords of Terra and sentenced to a penitent crusade wasn't bad luck, it was fair. Them almost being destroyed by the Tyranids wasn't bad luck. That's just kind of what happens when you face off against Tyranids and you can't recruit new Marines to replenish your numbers. And so on and so on and so on to almost every experience of supposed bad luck that this chapter has experienced. So I ask again, where is this bad luck? The answer is, it's nowhere. It doesn't exist. There have been stories written about the Lamenters which seem to emphasize their bad luck and twists of fate, but if we were to look at their chapter history and measure it up against this claim of bad luck and misfortune, the chapter is found lacking in it. I conclude that the bad luck of the Lamenters chapter is a rumor, both in the lore and in the community. And like in the lore, because it's a rumor and people believe that rumor, people can't see it any other way, and in their eyes, it becomes true. According to available information, their chapter master is Malachim Foros. He is the only chapter master listed in the chapter's records, despite the chapter having existed over 1,500 years. There are a few possible explanations for this. The first is that Blood Angel Space Marines are some of the longest lived of all Space Marines, meaning that if not for war, the Blood Angels would naturally outlive the rest of the Astartes. However, with standard Blood Angels, this long life is connected to processes like the consumption and cleaning of blood, which the Lamenters do not do. It could also be that he's just that much of a warrior that he has managed not to fall in battle for all of those years. Interestingly enough though, we often acknowledge Dante as the oldest Blood Angel because he is over 1,500 years old, but Malachim Foros might be just as old, if not older, than Dante. His name, Malachim Phoros, means angel of bearing or messenger of bearing, likely a reference to being an angel of grief, as in to bear grief. He was given such names as the Lord of Ruin due to the aura of sadness and bitter hatred that emanates from him. He is an inspiring figure and a powerful orator who has on many occasions convinced his battle brothers to stand with him on the most dire circumstances. Malachim Phoros has struggled to maintain control of the Black Rage and has been known to teeter at the edge of succumbing to the Black Rage, but brings himself back from the edge when this happens. Malachim's armor is gold, much like Dante's. Gold armor is important in the Blood Angels. It signifies high rank. The higher in rank you go in the Blood Angels chapter, the more gold you will see on the armor. Now, historically, the most gold-clad figures in the Blood Angels Legion were the Sanguinary Guard, which were basically an honor guard to Sanguinius. In current 40k, all Blood Angel successors that can trace their lineage back to the days of the Horus Heresy have a Sanguinary Guard unit, which means the Lamenters don't have a Sanguinary Guard unit, and that makes sense. Malachim's armor is artificial armor, which is basically an ancient suit of armor that's been modified throughout the ages and is a treasured possession of the chapter that has it. We can reasonably assume that this armor belonged at one point to the Blood Angels chapter. The weapons that Malachim carries are an ancient Infernus pistol and a glaive in carmine. Dante also carries an Infernus pistol, and the type of pistol is common with the Blood Angels. But the glaive in carmine is unique because only the Sanguinary Guard and the Sanguinor can carry these specific blades. Made of angel steel and only known to be created by the artisans of the Blood Angels through a technique that has long been forgotten, these swords are chapter relics of the Blood Angels, some of them having been used since the days of the Horus Heresy. So Malachim Phoros wears artificial armor from the Blood Angels and carries a sword that only a high-ranking Blood Angel carries. At first, this makes sense being that he's a chapter master, but then you have to think, where did he get this armor and weapons if the Lamenters were created on Mars and are a Crusade chapter that didn't interact with their progenitor chapter until much later in their history? This is another one of those parts in the lore where I attempt to patch a plot hole or make a piece of lore make sense. So some of the Space Marine chapters that are descended from the same Primarch make these informal brotherhoods based on that lineage. For example, the Dark Angels have the Unforgiven. The Imperial Fists have the Last Wall. The Blood Angels have something called the Sanguinary Brotherhood, and it's composed of the Blood Angels and all of their successors. If something happens to the first founding chapter of the lineage, it can call on the assistance of its successors based on this organization. Chapters can be descended from a shared Primarch, but not be part of the Brotherhood for various reasons. They kind of have to be verified and in good standing, so to speak. Because of them not being able to trace their lineage back to the days of the Horus Heresy, you would expect that the Lamenters wouldn't be part of the Sanguinary Brotherhood, but in actuality, they are, and they are in good standing, whereas other Blood Angel successors who could trace their lineage are not. This is interesting because there is nothing in the Lamenters chapter lore that states that they interacted with the Blood Angels for the first 1500 years of their history. Despite this, they are still considered part of the Sanguinary Brotherhood. There are two instances in the lore where the Lamenters and the Blood Angels interact, and both of them are much later in their history. The first instance is more of a narrative happening. It's when Gabriel Seth, chapter master of the Flesh Terrors, is being judged by the Sanguinary Brotherhood for his rage and brutality. Malachim Phoros is present in this judgment, and Gabriel Seth makes a comment toward him saying that he was yellow in a room of red, and implying that Phoros knew nothing of combat. It's unknown when this judgment of Gabriel Seth happened, but during it, apparently, Malachim Phoros was wearing yellow armor instead of gold. The second instance is during the devastation of Baal. All the Blood Angel successors are called to defend Baal against the Tyranids of High Fleet Leviathan. Dante calls to the Lamenters, and they refuse to heed the call. Dante is actually understanding of this, likely because during this time, the Lamenters were still on their penitence crusade, which is a fragile state for any chapter to be in. Understanding that if they deployed onto Baal to fight against the Tyranids, the chapter could be wiped out, Dante wasn't really upset that they couldn't arrive and help. This relationship between the Lamenters chapter and the Blood Angels chapter can imply something about their founding. Available information implies that the Lamenters were not a secret project. We know when they were created, we know where they were created, we know who created them, we know from which lineage they were created. This combined with the fact that their nature, or the nature of their gene seed, is rather deviant from the standard Blood Angels gene seed, and the fact that regardless of this deviation they are still acknowledged and welcomed into the Sanguinary Brotherhood, means that their creation was on some level permitted. Someone had to say, yes, you are allowed to use this unique store of gene seed in order to create another one of our successors. This is actually implied in available information, that the Blood Angels did permit experimentation as they were trying to find a cure for their flaws. If someone could permit this from happening, it would be a high-ranking figure of the Blood Angels at the time, a commander of the Sanguinary Brotherhood. It could not have been Dante, because Dante became a Space Marine around the same time, which is why Malachim and Dante are around the same age. In fact, we know that it was the chapter masters of two second founding successors that served as the joint commanders of the Brotherhood around that time. Regardless, this permission to make a chapter from that unique gene seed could possibly explain why the chapter is considered part of the Sanguinary Brotherhood, and why Malachim Foros wears relic armor from the Blood Angels chapter. Going back to Malachim Foros, one of the names he is given is the Watcher of the Deeps, and unlike his other name, the Lord of Ruin, this name is not given any explanation or origin. I researched deeps in relation to Warhammer 40k and came up with two results that could possibly connect to the chapter master. The first reference is to the Hierarchy Deeps. If you've watched my Necron series, the Hierarchy Deeps should sound familiar. The Hierarchy Deeps are an area of space west of the Sol System in the Segmentum Pacificus. It's where the Thocht dynasty of Necrons reside and their cradle of war. The reason why this reference can connect to the chapter master is because soon after their creation, the Lamenters chapter traveled to fight in the western fringes of Imperial space, where they were said to battle Xenos and rescue Imperial worlds that were isolated in that area for about 1500 years. I think this is why he's called the Watcher of the Deeps, the Watcher of the Hierarchy Deeps. The second reference is to the Coronid Deeps, but that connection is very loose, it being more of a reference to the past of the Blood Angels Legion, of which the Lamenters didn't have anything to do with. So much about the Lamenters chapter is focused on sorrow and grief. The name of their flagship, Mater Lacrimarum, means Mother of Mourning. One of their relics is the Banner of Tears, which was repaired by a Sisters of Battle order who cried tears onto it while doing so. And so on and so on and so on. Earlier I was speaking about the heraldry of the chapter and how, depending on the version that you are observing, the droplet of the heraldry is either red, as in a drop of blood, or black. The most consistent version of the drop color is the red version because it's featured on official art from the Badab War campaign books. The black version of the droplet seems to be an effect of shadow on the pauldron, because if you look at this example, you can even see that the heart is partially black. However, I think it would have been cool if the color of the drop was black, because it could have roundabout been connected to the Blood Angels Legion history. So I'm going to talk about some correspondences between the Lamenters and the Blood Angels history. These connections are unofficial and not confirmed as the reasons why the Lamenters are what they are, but if someone was trying to search for references for the symbology of the chapter, this information could be valuable. So it could have been cool if the droplet was black specifically due to the chapter's depression and melancholy, because it could have been a reference to the tattoo that Sanguinius got on his face after the events of Cygnus Prime. It was during this time that Sanguinius himself was the most depressed. In a nutshell, Horus was corrupted by chaos, and he began to look at his brothers to see which he could bring to his side and who was a threat to his rule. Though the powers of chaos wanted Sanguinius as their champion, Horus viewed Sanguinius as a threat to his rule. So, using his position as War Master under the guise of still being loyal, Horus sent Sanguinius and the Blood Angels to the Cygnus cluster in the Ultima Segmentum. He said that there was an alien species that needed to be gotten rid of. Because Horus was aware of the red thirst in the Legion, he added like a second layer of persuasion by saying that the aliens might actually have a cure for the red thirst. Trusting Horus, his closest Primarch brother, Sanguinius took his Legion to the Cygnus cluster. The thing was, there were no aliens in the Cygnus cluster. It was a trap set by Horus and the Wordbearer's Legion to either destroy the Blood Angels Legion or corrupt them. Either way, they would be out the way when Horus moved to siege Terra. Before the Blood Angels went to the Cygnus cluster, Sanguinius had the Legion meet at a system called the Nortaba system before they, as a collective, journeyed to Cygnus, right? Many Blood Angel detachments never made it to Nortaba. Some of them were lost in the warp when the Ruin Storm struck, and we'll talk about the Ruin Storm a little bit later, but some couldn't make it because they served as something called Lamenters Honor Guardians. The responsibility of these Blood Angels was to watch over the silent battlefields where the Legion has shed its blood. Going deeper, you can't find any more information on the Lamenters Honor Guardians besides that. However, due to their role overlooking battlefields where the Legion fought and lost its members, this could connect them to high-ranking Blood Angels of the Legion known as Crimson Paladins, which were called the Cheruvim and the Stormwinds because of their quick anger and lasting temperaments of hate. Their responsibilities were to guard the Primarch's halls and sanctums, but they also served on the battlefield when necessary. It's a reach for me to say that the Red Paladins also served as Lamenters Honor Guardians, but if there were Blood Angels assigned to watch over places where the Legion's brothers fell, they would likely be stationed at bases at such locations. It's not like they were just standing outside. That base could count as one of the Primarchs or the Legion's sanctums, which could be guarded by Red Paladins, making them Lamenters Honor Guardians. What was my point of saying all that? I say all that to say that the name of the Lamenters might actually have been inspired by a role in the Blood Angels Legion called the Lamenters Honor Guardians, who were definitely connected to the act of mourning due to their responsibility for watching over the dead. As I said, that is not a canon confirmed connection at all. I just thought it was a cool correspondence. Plus, Alan Bly created the Lamenters Chapter, and he's the one who wrote the Bedab War rulebooks, but he also is the person who wrote the Black Books for the Horus Heresy, where this information on the Lamenters Honor Guardians is found. So, I feel like sometimes he puts little references between past and future with his work, but I don't know, that's just me assuming. When the Blood Angels arrived to the Cygnus cluster, Sanguinius and the Legion started realizing that something wasn't right. Pretty soon, they were attacked by demons. Interesting point number 2 was that there was a world in the Cygnus cluster called Phoros, which had been destroyed previous to their arrival due to the demonic activity happening in the cluster. Malachim, Phoros, a world called Phoros in the Cygnus cluster. Loose connection and loose correspondence, and an ironic reuse of a word in the Legion's history. The real battle of the Cygnus system was on the world of Cygnus Prime, where Sanguinius and the Blood Angels fought against Kabanda and demons from the warp. A lot of Blood Angels died during this, and due to the energy in the air, a lot of Blood Angels became overwhelmed with the red thirst. It was a slaughter. At one point, Kabanda killed like 500 Blood Angels with one swipe of his axe, and because Sanguinius and his Legion are super psychically connected, the death of so many Blood Angels at one time sent a psychic backlash that knocked Sanguinius unconscious. When this happened, the Legion present on Cygnus fell to the Black Rage for the first time ever. Sanguinius was able to be brought back to consciousness and the Legion would return back to normal, but they had to leave the system immediately. It was after the events of Cygnus that Sanguinius would get a tattoo on his face of a black teardrop to honor those Blood Angels that were slain on Cygnus Prime. I say all of that to say that if the droplet on the heraldry of the Lamenters was black, it could have been connected to that tattoo and the reason why the tattoo was made, connecting the symbol to the first time that the Legion succumbed to the Black Rage and marking the beginning of Sanguinius' depression. So immediately following the Cygnus campaign, Sanguinius and the remaining Blood Angels arrived at Macragge, unable to make it to Terra because of the Ruin Storm. The Ruin Storm was a warp storm that was made by the Wordbearer's Legion to prevent reinforcements from arriving to Terra when Horus decided to attack Terra. Just like how Sanguinius was seen as a threat, so was Guilliman, and so to get rid of Guilliman, Horus sent Guilliman and his legion to Calth, lying to them about an enemy that was there. When they got there, they were jumped by the Wordbearers, who then activated the Ruin Storm. The Ruin Storm kind of isolated the Ultima Segmentum from the Sol System. No communication could make it through the storm, and travel through it was near impossible. Because of this, Guilliman wasn't sure if Terra had already fallen, so he decided to make a second Imperium called the Imperium Secundus, which would be led by Guilliman, Sanguinius, and Lionel Johnson. It was agreed that Sanguinius would be made the proxy emperor of the Imperium Secundus. Sanguinius didn't really want to do this. He was in a really bad headspace after Cygnus Prime, and he was beginning to have visions of his future, of the Horus Heresy, and of his death at the hands of Horus. Plus, he had fallen into a trap because of his desire to find a cure for the Legion's flaws, and almost sacrificed himself in desperation to obtain it. Luckily, before he could sacrifice himself, a Blood Angel sacrificed himself in place of Sanguinius, and was possessed by a demon, becoming a figure known as the Red Angel. Sanguinius had tried to find a cure for one flaw and ended up uncovering another, the Black Rage. He was depressed, but in the end, he accepted the role as regent or proxy emperor. Earlier, I said I was trying to find a correspondence for the checker pattern featured on the Lamenters heraldry. And while I know almost 100% that this was not and could not have been the inspiration behind the design due to the differences in time between the creation of the Lamenters by Alan Bly in 2010 and the artwork of the scene by Neil Roberts in 2014, but the checker pattern is featured in both of these art pieces of this moment. These images are on Macragge. One shows the moment Sanguinius is announced as the Emperor's regent, and the other shows Sanguinius with a lot on his mind on the throne as Emperor of Imperium Secundus. All I'm saying is that all of the symbols of the Lamenters and the themes of the Lamenters are in these images. So Neil Roberts didn't portray the gem on Sanguinius's armor as heart-shaped, but it would be if he did. Sanguinius had a black tear tattoo that was also not featured due to the position that he's in these art pieces. The floor is a checker pattern, Sanguinius is depressed, the Black Rage was revealed, his armor is gold. All the themes of the Lamenters are in these images. Of course, these are all very loose but ironic correspondences that are easily dismissed by the drop next to the heart on the heraldry of the Lamenters being red instead of black. It's like, did I waste your time saying all that information? I don't think so, because I think either way, if you're interested in the Lamenters, you should know history about the Blood Angels. And if you're curious about more information about the Blood Angels, I did a Primarch video on Sanguinius. Shameless plug. Anyway, back to the modern era. At the end of the 41st millennium, the Lamenters were still on their penitent crusade, and their numbers were severely depleted. It's also thought that Malachim Foros could be dead, believed to have either been killed by the Minotaurs during the Badab War when their fleet was attacked, or still imprisoned by the Minotaurs. There were rumors that if the latter was true at one point, he has since escaped and rejoined his remaining battle brothers. This has not been confirmed at the time of recording this video. What has changed with the coming of the 42nd millennium is that apparently the chapter's penitent crusade has ended because Primaris Lamenters were reported helping to fight against the Barghisi Xenos species besides the Iron Lords chapter. This provides a bit of conundrum. When the Minotaurs attacked and destroyed the Mater Lacrimarum flagship of the Lamenters, the chapter's gene seed was on the ship as well, which potentially means the chapter gene seed stores were either destroyed or stolen by the Minotaurs. To make matters worse, the Lamenters that survived the Badab War were sentenced on a penitent crusade, during which the chapter could not recruit any new Marines to make up for losses inflicted during the crusade. During this Penitent Crusade, the Lamenters were followed by the Red Hunters, another Space Marine chapter that's like connected to the Inquisition, so they definitely couldn't regrow their numbers during this time. But apparently, they either survived their crusade and were reinforced with Primaris Marines like all other Blood Angel successors were, or they didn't survive and a new chapter was created bearing their colors and heraldry to honor them. Either way, this changes the future of the Lamenters. I spent a significant portion of this video discussing how the Lamenters gene seed was different from the standard Blood Angels gene seed. If the chapter is being reinforced or recreated using Primaris Marines, they will be created using the new improved Blood Angels gene seed created by Belisarius Cawl. This gene seed still imbues the Marines implanted with it with both the Red Thirst and the Black Rage. If the chapter is reinforced with Primaris Marines, then the Lamenters will become like the rest of the Sons of Sanguinius, experiencing the same flaws, whereas before they were unique for their lack of the Red Thirst. But there is an alternative. The Minotaurs are a loyal chapter of the Imperium of Man, and they serve the High Lords of Terra directly. After the Badab War, the Minotaurs and the Lamenters were on the same side again. If the Minotaurs took the gene seed stores of the Lamenters during the Badab War, they could have, at the command of the High Lords of Terra, given the Lamenters their gene seed stores back at the end of their Penitent Crusade. Using these gene seed organs, the chapter could rebuild, and upon being provided with the means to cross the Rubicon procedure, the Lamenters could become Primaris Marines, transitioning smoothly into the new era of Warhammer 40k. I don't know which is more likely, but I'm hoping for the latter situation, if only so that the Lamenters can keep that unique, genuine melancholy and sadness that is tied to their deviant gene seed, rather than that aspect of the chapter being a learned behavior by Primaris Marines wearing their color, but having standard Blood Angel gene seed. I guess we'll have to see which direction GW goes in with them. I also hope that Malakim Foros is not dead and that he gets the same Rubicon treatment. He's too cool of a character for us to let go. Last but not least, the purpose of this video was to discern whether or not the Lamenters are actually a cursed founding chapter. Due to being created on Mars by the Adeptus Mechanicus and the creation having their information known instead of obscured, I would say that they are not a chapter that was created on Inculaba as part of the Homo sapiens Novus project. Because of our speculation about the origin of their flaws, or lack thereof, being from the source of the DNA used to create their gene seed and not necessarily any actual modifications, I would say that they are not a cursed founding chapter. Due to us dispelling their bad luck as being as much of a myth as the cursed founding itself, I would say that they are not a result of the project on Inculaba. Finally, because they do not match my criteria for being a subject of the Inculaba project, namely that if they were, the Marines would be larger than standard Marines and their flaws wouldn't be connected to their gene seed, they are not a cursed founding chapter since their Marines are of standard height and their flaw or lack thereof was connected to the gene seed used to create them. That was a long video. Shout out to those who made it to the end. I hope that you all enjoyed it, that you learned something new, and if you did, please consider liking and subscribing for more lore analysis such as this. Also, please share with a hobby friend who you think might enjoy it, as it helps the channel grow and it helps me to earn from my channel for my hobby projects. I'm currently trying to build a tomb world for my Necrons, and y'all could help make that a reality just by liking, commenting, and sharing my videos. Without anything else to say, Inquisitor Vuln out. Remember, the Emperor protects and the future is successor.